All right, hello there, everyone. This is Mr. Brass, and today I'm here with King Tech, Pro Wrestling Phenomenon. How are you doing, my good sir?
I'm hanging in there, same stuff, different day. Dealing with the cold up here in New Jersey.
hmm Yeah. Um, I see you're a RoboCop fan.
Oh yeah. I just picked this actually my newest T-shirt. I'm a big fan of movie T-shirts. I wear a movie T-shirt every day of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
RoboCop's a great movie though. Can't go wrong with it. It's a classic.
did you see the reboot?
I have. I think I only saw it once when it first came out. I wasn't impressed, and honestly, I do not remember really much from it.
Uh, yeah, I did. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to be as good as the original because I don't think you could ever top it. But I thought that like maybe they could maybe enhance the graphics and stuff and make it at least I don't know decent.
I
It
think the
really
problem with the remake is they didn't understand the themes of the original RoboCop that make the original RoboCop unique. RoboCop, like on the surface,
mhm.
really should be a dumb movie. Like it should have been a terrible movie. Like think about it. Ooh, a cop that's a RoboCop. It's that's not like the surface level elements of it aren't very good. What's good about it is the sarcastic undertones of it and like the subliminal, like the Paul Verhoeven stuff that you also see that in Starship Troopers. And Starship Troopers is good for the same reason. Like on paper and on the surface, it really is a dumb movie, but once you look into the deeper themes underneath it, you're like, oh wow, this is like something that's deep. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, what made RoboCop the original movie so good was that it had that sort of inner conflict of is he more man than he is machine, or is he more machine than man? And it had that sort of more inner conflict that was more resonating in the original story, whereas that was more absent in the remake. All right, so sorry about that, guys, but we're back, and it looks like apparently RoboCop was hearing us, and he decided to cut my friend here's internet line.
This is a crazy conspiracy theory you have here, and I don't believe in any conspiracy theories. Okay, I don't do conspiracy theories, and that's craziness. I don't know why
Eh,
you would say that.
yeah, well, I mean, he did do the WCW circuit, so he could be going to UWA.
Yeah, I would imagine the bump in that suit must have been rough.
Um, so yeah, I think that the reason why I don't think the reboot of the RoboCop actually worked as well as the original was because like one of the big story arcs of the original RoboCop was like that inner conflict between man and machine. Was he more man than he was machine? And
Right.
they didn't really emphasize that at all in the reboot.
Right, you're absolutely right about that. In the original RoboCop, one of the most powerful emotional scenes is when he goes back home and he sees thinking about his family and all that.
Yeah, it's apparently been reboot central in Hollywood because that seems to be all they're making.
And so yeah, well, they're creatively bankrupt, Hollywood right now. Everything that they do is pretty much everything that they do is a reboot. It's as crazy as it sounds. Tom Cruise is one of the few actors that's even involved in non-remakes nowadays. He does the Mission Impossible movies. They may be sequels, they're not remakes. And he's got the Maverick, the Top Gun movie, the new Top Gun movie, which isn't bad. Obviously, a lot of people love that. Though it's really good too.
Yeah, I heard a lot of good things about it.
Yeah, it's definitely something I would recommend checking out.
hmm Yeah. So can you? So obviously they. So the audience knows that you're a professional wrestler. Can you tell the audience how you really got into that line of profession?
Well, I was it wasn't I didn't start off overnight. Obviously, there was a lot before I started to do pro wrestling. I did backyard wrestling, which back when I started getting into wrestling, that was a very taboo thing to do, was to be a backyard wrestler. It's not so much anymore. On the contrary, it's starting to become kind of like a very accepted thing, and almost like in addition to a wrestler's character, that he started there. But I would make the argument that the vast majority of wrestlers nowadays, maybe not the vast majority, but a good amount of them started in backyard wrestling. And when I started. The crazy part is that I really just started with N64 and No Mercy and all them type of games on Nintendo 64. When I was a teenager, we used to love playing that game, and we created created versions of our characters in that game, and it just transitioned from, hey, instead of playing a video game, let's drag a mattress out into the backyard and do it ourselves, which, very rudimentary beginnings. But that was in 2001 is when I first started doing that. And what really changed the trajectory of it all is on the internet. And I really honestly, I don't recall how it happened, but I ended up getting in touch with the owner of UWA Elite, or which was just UWA back then, the company I still work for today, 20 years later. And they as well were in a yard, but they had taken it to a much higher degree, much like a more professional level than what I was doing in my local town with a bunch of guys that I went to high school with. So we kind of like shut down our local thing and decided, hey, let's just join up with these guys. They were in Sayreville, which just recently made the news. And they had a homemade ring, which was a really neat upgrade to what we were doing, to actually be able to wrestle in a home ring. And there was a guy, a wrestler there at UWA in 2002 and 2003 when we were there. His name was Dave Wynett, and he did the backyard with us, but he had also had one foot in the professional wrestling world at that point. And he's the one that really, he saw. He was in the UWA Fed, and he kind of like pinpointed guys that he really thought really should go to training and get the professional training and to start to do the professional shows. And I was one of them that he kind of like took underneath his wing. And my first pro match was in this, I want to say the summer of 2003, which is roughly about 20 years ago, which is an interesting fact. First pro match was 2003, and I had gone to, and he would take me to training. I'd go to training every, like, I don't know what weekday it was, but it was, I would go one weekday a night, and I went for about 2 or 3 years to that training. I went up to Garfield, New Jersey for training, for wrestling training. And, it kind of blossomed from there. But my early years, I don't know how to explain it, but I was more fixated on making the best backyard fed that I can than becoming a pro wrestler, which now I look back at it and it's a big mistake. I wasted a lot of time when I was in my youth and in my prime focusing on the backyard stuff. And don't get me wrong, like, it was a lot of fun. That was the appeal of backyard wrestling. Pro wrestling itself is very, depending on where you are, it can become very dog eat dog. It's very, a lot of guys are in it just for themselves, and I was never about that. To me, wrestling, yeah, you want to be in it for yourself, but for me, the what I was really in it for was to build a company. I always wanted to have the company that I was working for, or whatever the promotion, whatever you want to call it, as a whole. Like, that has always been my fixation, was to make wrestling like a company as a whole, because I'm a big fan of consistency in promotions. Like, I could have done more indie wrestling, but I'm not a big fan of getting a booking, going to an indie show, and just having a random one-off match. Okay, you get there. Who are you wrestling? This guy. Okay, so what's the story? Well, there is no story because it's a random one-off match, and then you would go to the next indie show and you would do another random one-off match, and so forth and so forth. And that never really interested me. What interests me the most in wrestling is having like like a WWE type environment where you're wrestling for one company and you can build your character over the years. And I think that's probably like why now I have a very interesting wrestling character, because I didn't, for 20 years, I didn't just do like I just described to you. I didn't just go to like random indie feds and have one-off matches that do nothing to build anything character-wise. I decided instead to go the opposite route and stick with UWA so that King Tech could, almost like being in WWE. That's what UWA is. It's WWE on a smaller scale. But yeah, that's how I started. I did have the pro wrestling training though, and I'm very happy that I did that. Some guys don't even bother doing that, but I think that's a mistake. You should do the pro wrestling training. But like I was saying in the beginning, maybe I should have gotten out more at a younger age, because maybe I'd be on TV now. But it is what it is, and I'm happy with what I've done in wrestling. UWA was in the backyard from 2002 to 2005, and then it took like a 2 to 3 year. We decided that a lot of the wrestlers at 2005 decided, the backyard stuff wasn't really doing it anymore, and there was a small break in UWA. There were guys tried to go out and do their own things and working for other indie feds, and then in 2010. A lot of the old boys that were in UWA got together, and we decided that we wanted to create a professional wrestling version of UWA. And we did, and it started in 2011, and it's been going strong ever since 2011 to today. And actually going into this year, 2023, we have our biggest schedule that we've had since we started in 2011. I think we've got 14 shows. We've expanded outside of our home base. Most indie feds or promotions or whatever, like I say, whatever we want to call them, we'll do different venues all over the place, which is a fine strategy to do. But what we typically do is run in the same venue over and over and over again. So what I would refer to as like a home base. This year, we're still going to have our home base where we're running a good majority of our shows, but we're starting to expand out to other venues. I think we're doing one in Jackson. We're doing the Action in Jackson, which is at a new sportsplex next to Six Flags that just opened up, brand new facility. It looks awesome. We're doing something in Brunswick for some kind of food truck festival. We did one last year. It was really cold out, so it really wasn't that successful. So I'm hoping that the warmer weather will bring more people in. It's an outside event. Yeah, that's basically, I've done UWA my whole life. My whole wrestling life has been basically with one company, for better or worse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a sort of loyalty that you can't really find in a lot of workers.
No, it isn't. And that's a double-edged sword, because yes, you want to be about yourself, because the more about yourself you are, the faster you're going to end up on TV if you really want to be on TV. You know what I mean? It's a much longer and a much more difficult route as opposed to the individual one to raise up a company, right? I want my company to become successful. Obviously, we're not going to ever, be big enough to rivals WWE or any of these other big feds, but yeah, I'm very proud of what UWA has become. UWA is a very unique wrestling company, independent wrestling company, like as I was alluding to, because we have consistent storylines. Like there's, as a fan, if you come to UWA, there's so much to invest in. It's like watching a weekly TV show, or just like WWE or anything on TV like that. So yeah, and I think there's a lot of value in that once you look at other indie promotions and how they run, where it's really just, okay, here's a show in one venue, random wrestlers. Ooh, what kind of, who can we bring in on this show? and that brings me to my next point. Don't get me wrong. Every so often, we'll bring in a bigger star. We've had Hurricane Helms, we've had Nunzio, Jay Lethal, a bunch of other guys wrestling with us. But for the most part, we try to focus and feature homegrown talent like myself and other guys. And when I'm on Twitter, I post a lot about my videos or what I do in UWA, but I always try to point out to the other people on Twitter, I'm just one part of one cog in the machine that is UWA, and there's a lot of great homegrown wrestlers there, which have their own storied history. Yeah. So there's a lot. UWA has a lot to offer wrestling fans, and it's an underrated, unseen gem in independent wrestling. And I wish it had more exposure. I really do.
Yeah. I know that a common complaint that does come to indie feds is sometimes their over reliance on violent matches.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. We're more like more of a family friendly type fed. Don't get me wrong. There's chairs, there's ladders, and all that involved. But yeah, we're not CZW. We're not even close to that. And while I respect the wrestlers that do that, that is not my thing. I'm not a big fan of the level of mutilation that goes on there. You know what I mean? That's not for me personally. I know a lot of the guys that do it, and I respect them. And, a lot of them I call I'm friends with a good number of them, but man, that's got to be a short shelf life. Doing that kind of gig where you're every single show you're going out there and landing on glass and doing thumbtacks and this and that. Don't get me wrong, I've done thumbtacks before, but it's something that it gets overdone, if you ask me. You can't do that every show. You can't do that every match on every show because it gets old fast. And when you're making that kind of sacrifice to your body, you don't want it to get old. And you know what I mean? So you want to build people up to that.
Well, I think the problem really comes down to is a common complaint is that it sort of ruined the whole injury angles in wrestling. Because how are you going to have a dude that gets slammed through barbed wire tables on a regular basis? How are you going to have an injury angle with him if you want to have him? If you want to have him get into a feud with someone, and you want to get the guy that he's feuding with to make the guy look bad, you can't really have an injury angle because you're really going to tell me that this dude that gets slammed through flaming barbed wire tables, that he's going to miss action because he hurt his hand, by getting slammed on a chair or on steel steps.
Right, and you make a great point there. The irony of it, however, is that these guys who do get slammed through barbed wire and do this, when they do get injured for real, it is something stupid. You know what I mean? It is, oh, I slipped and fell on my arm the wrong way, and it always makes me laugh. Obviously it's not anything to laugh at, but it is in an ironic sense that you do all this crazy stuff, and it's the simple injuries that do that. But you're on a work level, yeah, you can't do a worked injury storyline with a guy who's regularly going through flaming tables. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also sort of funny when you have a guy let's say, Tommy Dreamer or Jon Moxley or whatever, how you'll on one show you'll have them where they get sent through all these tables, they get slammed onto the thumbtacks and stuff like that, and on the next week's show they get pinned off like a DDT.
Yeah.
So yeah. So you have, so you sort of have a contrast where in one match it takes throwing them through 4 or 5 barbed wire tables in order to get them to have a 3 count, and then the next week they're in a regular match, and all it takes to put them down is a very hard DDT.
Yeah, but you got to keep in mind too. Add this. You got to factor this into in today's world. With the internet and everything, doing a worked injury angle is not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah.
Most Most people are, constantly, following these people. It's, very tough to do that.
Yeah, that's true too. I mean, it's sort of like how when Triple H was having his feud with Brock Lesnar, and Brock Lesnar in kayfabe broke his arm, and the next scene you see him on like raising Floyd Mayweather's hand in UFC in like a not in a UFC in a boxing match.
Right. You're playing. To me, I don't like. I wouldn't. I'm not a big fan of that kind of thing. So I think that's a big risk to take. I think you're playing with fire with that. I talk about this a lot on Twitter. Is that there's a thin line between doing a worked entertainment and insulting people's intelligence. And I'm not a big fan of that. Like, me watching wrestling growing up, it was easy for me to like spot that kind of thing where I'm like, yeah, this is BS or this is bogus. And I love wrestling, so I tolerate it. But I figure a lot of people that might be turned off of wrestling are turned off for that very reason, like what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Where you could smell it, you could see it, it's obvious. Like his arm's not broken. He's nobody. A good example of that is whenever they do it with a cinder block. They've done that in WWE several times. I think Scott Hall did it to Stone Cold, or at one point where they break the cinder block over somebody, and like that to me is insulting the fans' intelligence. Like, yeah, nobody believes that you could do that without killing someone. Like the person would be dead if you smash a cinder block over his head. With the way they crumble like that, you got to be careful with that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, Seth Rollins did that to Dean Ambrose where he did the stomp on the cinder block, and I'm like, if you really did that, his head would have just like exploded.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of that type of thing. I talk about kayfabe a lot online. You know what I mean? Half the time I want to kayfabe certain people, but the other times I'm like, why am I even doing this? And it's 2023, and the vast majority of people understand how wrestling works. With the internet and everything, it's the cat's out of the bag. Pandora's box has been opened. The proverbial Pandora's box on a lot of the stuff in wrestling, right? You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing with magic tricks.
Yeah.
Anybody who does the magic trick kind of thing. I think the vast majority of people today know that there's some kind of gimmick involved in it. So
Personally, I've always found that with wrestling is like the main thing that you're always trying to do is, I mean, whenever people say stuff like it's fake, I was saying, do you have that approach when you watch like any other show? Like if you're watching Game of Thrones or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's it. But I could think of even better examples. Like a great example that I always give people is like a Jackie Chan movie, like a karate movie. When you see the choreography, like, did you ever watch? I'll ask people. I said, have you ever come out of a karate movie going, "Oh, that was lame," because I know it was fake, and I'm never going to watch karate again? No, nobody has that reaction because they suspend their disbelief. Wrestling's different now. I don't. A lot of the boys, a lot of the guys I do this with probably don't like that I do this. That I don't really do kayfabe on that level. But I've always been under the assumption that people when people get very, oh, wrestling's lame because it's fake. The reason why they're saying that is because they're being lied to. Nobody likes being lied to. So just I'm not gonna go outwardly explain how it's fake to somebody, but I'm not outwardly gonna be like, yeah, I'm really fighting him or whatever. And plus, with me, it doesn't really that kayfabe, that kind of strict kayfabe, doesn't benefit me at all because I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big guy. You know what I mean? Most when I go around during the day, when I'm working and I'm BSing with people, just random strangers, and I end up saying, "Oh, I'm a professional wrestler." Most of them look at me and be like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Well, actually, yeah, I am." And they're like, "Well, why don't you look like Hulk Hogan?" I'm like, "Well, because wrestling's kind of fake." Like that's
Well, I always found it funny that people often, because that's a big thing that I often hear about many criticisms about newer wrestling is that you have smaller guys.
right.
Uh, and they say you don't have any larger than life figures. And I'm
You don't have to. When they say larger than life, that they misunderstand what that means, because larger than life isn't a literal thing. It's not literally referring to physicality. It can, don't get me wrong, it can. Your physicality or the size of Andre the Giant can certainly contribute to the larger than life aspects of it. But the larger than life aspects of it, in my opinion, from doing this for 20 years, come from more from the character end of it than the physicality or that. You know what I'm saying? The zaniness of it and the entertainment aspect of it and what you do as a character is what makes you larger than life.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also funny is like how, because the people that will put out like that will say that, oh well, the wrestlers aren't larger than life, like they don't have they're not all 6'5" and have like and weigh 350 pounds and are all jacked up. And yeah, and I'm saying, well, you do know what, like, but they'll say that on one hand, and then on the other hand, they say, oh, you see all these roided up freaks, and
right.
And I'm like, well, I mean, which is it? Because like, if you're demanding larger wrestlers, that breeds competition amongst wrestlers to get bigger, and they're going to do that.
And that was a big problem, and a lot of that is shortens these guys' lives, and then plus all the hits and all the all the other stuff that comes with wrestling, and that. Yeah, I don't want to put out any names because I don't want to speculate. I don't like doing that. You know what I mean? Especially with but a lot of the guys, in the 90s and even into the early 2000s, and a lot of them were doing that. And
yeah, I mean, I just think it's more hypocritical because on one hand they'll say, oh well, look, all these wrestlers are dying, but on the other hand they're saying that they're not larger than life anymore. They're not 6'5", 350 pounds. I'm like, well, one leads to the other. If you're demanding,
you can get to that kind of physical size without doing the steroids. Like, I don't think Bobby Lashley, for example, is doing steroids. I think that guy's just naturally.
Yeah. I mean, there are people that are naturally bigger, but not everyone has that sort of genetic lineage where they can just get like that naturally.
Right. Plus, those guys that are like that, they want wrestling to be one style, right? And I'm not about that. You know what I mean? Wrestling should cater to everybody, and they're missing the fact that it's you can have all different ranges of guys, and because I'm a smaller guy and I've kind of always wrestled, against guys that are bigger than me. That's the irony of my wrestling career, is that I'm a smaller guy, but I've never participated really in any kind of division with other guys my size.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wrestled for UWA, and UWA they do have 6 foot guys. You know what I mean? I'm usually wrestling guys that are far larger than me, and through doing that for years, I've realized that the most powerful story that you could tell in wrestling is, David versus Goliath. And you know what I mean? There's a reason why that story resonates so much to people, and in 2015, the WrestleMania in 2015, I don't know what number it was, but one of the biggest disappointments for me on a mainstream wrestling thing was them not doing Brock Lesnar versus Daniel Bryan in the main event of WrestleMania. If you ask me, that match is a license to print money. Seeing that's what people. Yeah, you're gonna have the guys that want to see big guys slapping meat, but to me that gets boring. You know what I mean? You just gotta have different types of guys, different styles, different this, different that. So.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and people forget is like guys like Mick Foley, their entire gimmick was. Yeah, they're not like the other wrestlers.
Right, and Foley was one of the in the early 2000s. He was more over than sliced bread. So
yeah, so I mean, and I think that's part of the appeal, because when you have wrestlers that have like different, like they look different, they have different styles to them, you do end up getting people by saying, "Huh, I can relate to this guy a lot better because he's not 6'5", he's not 350 pounds of pure muscle. He's more,
Right.
you know, he's more of a relatable character."
Right. And, like when it comes to me in a wrestling ring, just because I'm smaller doesn't mean that I throw psychology out the window. Like, I've learned to incorporate psychology more than most wrestlers because of the situation I usually the huge guy versus small guy situation that I constantly find myself in. I very rarely suplex anybody. I very rarely powerbomb. I don't think I've powerbombed anybody in 15 years. Since
Yeah.
I was a little kid in the backyard. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna go out there. Like, I still believe in making things believable. You know what I mean? I think that's what makes my character, like, what I guess makes it acceptable to a mainstream audience, is that I do pay a lot of attention to that type of psychology. And
Mhm.
all of my offensive moves in wrestling are all universal moves, as I like to call them, moves that I could do to anybody. It doesn't matter how big you are, right? And that, if you ask me, the best finisher in wrestling history is the stunner. And the reason why it's the best wrestling finisher is because Stone Cold could do it to anybody. It doesn't matter if the guy's the size of Andre the Giant or my size. Anybody can take that move. With my move, every single move that I do in a wrestling ring is believable that I could do it to a guy 3 times my size. Now,
Yeah.
I don't. It doesn't matter how. I don't have to lift a guy up. You saw my
Yeah.
cannonball is my finisher, where I jump off the rope and just basically cannonball on top of somebody. You know what I mean? That's a perfect example of that. All of
Yeah.
my
Yeah. That's Akira Tozawa's finisher in
Well,
Viking Dead.
it was mine long before it was his. I assure
Yeah.
you of that. Sometimes I watch that and I wonder if they stole it from me, but that's a different story altogether.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. But that's how I always sort of seen it. Um. Now, when we get onto the culture aspect of it, you're the kind of guy that where you like to incorporate modern culture into your wrestling, where
Well, on the
you'll
contrary, I do history too, so which is the past.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, like I seen that because you'll wear war paint on,
I have
and
3 different characters. I basically do a kind of like speaking of you brought up Foley, Mick Foley, I do kind of like a 3 faces of Foley type thing, where I do 3 different characters, like 3 different historical characters. I do Vietnam, I do Sparta, and I do Civil War.
mhm,
But I like to really hammer home to people that my character is not a schizophrenic. I am when I do these characters, I am not. I'm taking it to the level Foley did in a kind of like a schizophrenic type level, where when I'm Vietnam, I'm doing like a PTSD or like whatever, like hiding in the jungle. Like, I don't change my voice. I don't do any of that.
mhm.
It's the same thing. I don't know if you're aware of Finn Balor, obviously on
Yeah,
WWE, right? You know who
and
that is. Like,
yeah,
when he was on the indie scene, he would dress up as different, like, he would do, like, one week he'd be Venom, and then the next week he'd be the Joker, and then the next week he'd be Carnage. And I'll never forget, like, an interview with why he does that, and it really it's about, on a character level, I do it to intimidate my opponents, like, so
yeah,
that they know that I'm not messing around.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm also a big believer in that, like, the entrances and all that. But that comes from UWA. That comes from being part of a company that values that type of thing. That is kind of like a mini WWE. So I was able to explore those type of things. Most guys, a lot of indie wrestlers are just trunks. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. They're just a pair of trunks.
yeah,
You could be the best wrestler in the world, but that bores me. That if you're just a pair of trunks, there's nothing more boring to me.
yeah.
Like, show us
Who's
what
the
your
biggest
character is.
yeah, who's the biggest guy you've ever wrestled?
Are you saying biggest physically or biggest in terms of stardom?
Physically and that, you can get both.
Well, the biggest guy I've ever wrestled, like, physically, is probably Dr. Bose, who's in UWA. He's a good 6 foot, 200 and something pounds. Throws me around like I'm a rag doll. Um, I guess the biggest star opponent that in today's world would be Jay Lethal.
Mm.
I wrestled numerous times when I was. Jay's from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and Jay was a part of UWA from 2004 and 2005. And then before then I remember I was saying in the beginning we took a break from 2005 to 2010, and in those years he ended up finding a lot of success going into TNA and all that. And obviously, you see what he's doing now in AEW, which I couldn't be more proud, be more happy for him. But yeah, wrestling today when I was younger, probably. But that list is small. I really, because like I was alluding to before when I was explaining my history, I generally did not do the indie rounds. So I really didn't find myself in too many situations where I might be, wrestling a guy that, like a former WWE wrestler or whatever brought in by the indie company. Because I generally didn't do that. And UWA generally doesn't do that because we were trying to rely on homegrown talent. Anytime UWA's brought in any of that, I was not chosen or whatever to be in that match. I wish if I could have picked one, I would have loved to have wrestled Hurricane Helms when we had him, and it was like 2018 we had him on one of our shows. That would have been nice.
Yeah. I always wondered, like, how would a guy like you, because I know that the dynamics must be different based on whoever you're taking on, but
right.
like, how would a guy like you deal with someone, let's say, the size of Omos in WWE, where you have like a 7'2" or 7'3" guy, and you have to
At that
take
point, okay, so that's a good question, and in the company that I work for, UWA, it's comparable, right? So the guys, there's nobody in the company that I can't believably have a competitive match, I guess is the way you would put it. But I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you. I'm not. If I were in WWE and I was put in a match with Omos, he would defeat me in 5 seconds flat. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Because there does have to be believability there. And like I was saying to you before, I very much believe in psychology. Yeah, maybe maybe I would when trying to plan the match, I would try to be like, all right, maybe I could do a little bit here. Maybe I could duck some of your stuff and hit you. But if you're dealing with a guy that size, the size of Omos, the example that you use, there's no way around it, man. I'm probably gonna lose that match in 30 seconds flat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because that's exactly like how you would expect it to go in real life.
Right. But I don't think that wrestling needs to necessarily be like real life. But there is, that would be such an egregious difference in physicalness that I don't think there's really much of a way around that. Like Brock Lesnar, if Brock Lesnar versus Tech would be, he would murder me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's actually I don't get a lot of like there does seem to be a bit of a hatred for guys that are like that. There seems to be that are that big because they say, well, they're immobile. They can't really do much of anything.
Well, I think that modern big guys have done a great job of changing that stereotype. It might have been true a while ago, and hell, even almost, even him, he moves around a little bit in the ring. He does have the giant Gonzalez quality to him a bit. I'm not gonna lie, but for the most part, yeah, I see him trying, but they're big guys. So
yeah, but
I've always been jealous of the big guys. They don't have to bump.
Yeah,
They have you know what I mean. That's always been something that I've always envied. You know what I mean. I can't. That must be really nice to be that size and not have to bump or to take anything really from anybody. Where on the other side of the spectrum, for 20 years, you can imagine what I've been through being my size.
Yeah,
I've been hitting with every move underneath the sun. I've been thrown everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, you watch Darby Allin wrestle, and that kind of gives you an idea of what I go through. On a match by match basis.
Yeah, I mean, well, here's even with Omos. I mean, he's still a pretty athletic dude because he takes suplexes from Bobby Lashley.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I give him credit for that, and I think he's leaps and bounds over the big guys of the past. I like I said, I brought up the example of Giant Gonzalez. I don't know if you remember Giant Gonzalez versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 9. Like those matches are horrible, and they're most people all agree that they're horrible, and it's because he's not doing. He just doesn't do anything. There's no athleticism there whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, someone had brought up like a funny match would be like if Giant Gonzalez could have actually made it to where it was him versus the Great Khali.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would be necessarily entertaining.
Yeah. Because you would just be like seeing two guys just exchanging chops to each other.
Right, and that's a WWE thing. They very much believe in that. They'll book that match just based on the spectacle of it. I don't know. To me, as a wrestler and as a fan of wrestling myself, that really never did it for me. There needs to be more to a match than just big guy versus big guy. I'm gonna hit the ropes, shoulder tackle. The other guy hits the ropes, shoulder tackle. They yell at each other, and then more shoulder tackle. I'm not really into that.
Yeah. So since I was thinking about how the cultural aspect comes into it. I remember when I first actually met you on Twitter, I actually didn't know you were even a pro wrestler, and I had seen some of your more political takes and your takes on movie culture, and I said, "Huh, this guy has a great name." And he has he seems to have these based opinions on Twitter, and I say, "Huh, I wonder how this guy would be like in a chat." And then I actually click on your profile and say, "You're a pro wrestler," and I'm like, "All right, that's even better because I'm a big pro wrestling fan."
Yeah. I think that's what makes me very popular on Twitter is that I have a lot of things, a lot of points of interest, right? Like I try to mix it up a lot, obviously with politics, and the movies, and the wrestling. I think it makes for an interesting trifecta that really brings people into following me. And I continue to keep. I plan to continue to keep doing that, even though, like we've talked to before, in the messages about how there's a lot of risk involved in doing what I do. You know what I mean? Because people like to don't when they hear something they don't like, they want to try and ruin someone's life over it, and it's no joke. I've had it happen to me recently, so.
Yeah, especially if you're someone of any kind of fame whatsoever. Like,
Right.
people seem to really get off on the idea of like taking someone that has any kind of notoriety at all and just trying to ruin their life.
Right, and when it comes to the politics on the Twitter, I really try my best to not lean in any one direction, and I find that that's the best way to kind of like be able to get away with what I'm doing. It's if once you become polarized in any direction, I think that's when the targets really start to come on you. You know what I mean? I think for the most part people respect what I have to say on there, even if it can come off sometimes as controversial.
Yeah.
So, but I might not do I might not do this if I was being paid the big bucks and I was on TV. That'd be a different story, and I'd have to I have to reevaluate my position and how I was on Twitter. But at the level I'm at in pro wrestling now, I can still afford to be this way, and I want to be this way. And I don't want to change who I am. That doesn't seem fun to me because I've always been very outspoken in that kind of way, and I enjoy being outspoken. And I'm not shy about how I feel. Obviously, I think most people who follow me know that. But if I was on TV and I was getting paid a lot of money, that would be the one thing that would probably stop me from doing this.
Yeah. What's your? Because I know many wrestling promotions, at least the big wrestling promotions like AEW and WWE, they're starting to more incorporate politics into their storylines.
Well, I don't know if they're starting to more do it. I think it's kind of always been there. Like WrestleMania 7 was built around Operation Desert Storm and Sergeant Slaughter and Hulk Hogan. And they originally had planned to do that WrestleMania in a bigger venue, I believe in California somewhere, and they legitimately got threats that someone was going to try and assassinate Sergeant Slaughter during the venue, so they had to switch it to a smaller venue where they can keep a better eye on there'd be less people there, and that it would be easier to keep it secure. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, I didn't know that part, but I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I
Yep.
think I think many people are a bit worried about that because they're afraid that wrestling will just become like another avenue of just politics, and it won't be.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I did tweet about that like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and about how professional wrestling is one of the last forms of entertainment we have that hasn't been ruined by extreme politics. Extreme politics one way or the other, whether identity politics or that kind of thing. It's still old school entertainment, and I think that's one of the things that is tremendous value in today's world. And people should realize that about wrestling. It's one of the last things that, they have it, but it's not. I don't know how to put it. Like, I guess, like I was saying, it's not polarized in one way or the other. You don't watch wrestling, you don't feel like you're being preached to in a political way, and that's
Yeah,
very, very refreshing.
yeah. Well, I mean, I always just found it sort of funny how some wrestlers really are when it comes to that. Where, like, I remember Glenn Jacobs, Kane. He's currently the mayor of Knoxville County,
Yeah,
and basically a bunch of wrestlers finding out his political positions that are in line with the main like GOP party. Like
right.
now they just start, jumping all over him. I'm like, well, you knew you knew that like he's a politician. He's part of this party. You're surprised that he's actually going down the line with the party.
Well, I had an experience tweeting about him probably about a year or two ago. I don't know how long it was exactly, but I did tweet about him once, and I'll never forget the outrage mob in my comments. And I'll never tweet about him again. I don't know what happened. I don't know if my tweet got caught up in the algorithm, and then my comments were just flooded with, oh, he's going on and on and on about him, and I was worried that they were gonna try and cancel me or whatever over just tweeting about. I don't even remember what I said about him, but it opened the floodgates, so to speak, and all hundreds of comments on that tweet. And I've never experienced anything like that. People on a certain side of the political spectrum really do not like him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's even funnier when it comes from people that are even current WWE employees, where they're talking bad about him, and I'm like, you do realize Vince McMahon and really like,
Linda,
they're all part of the GOP party.
right?
Like,
Linda was a position in the cabinet under Trump.
so I mean, you're basically complaining about Kane being a Republican politician while you're working for a company that does Republican politics.
Right, right. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a big fan
Yeah.
straight up right wing politics either. Like I like
Well,
nuance.
yeah, I know that, but I mean, it'd be sort of like if imagine if you're in AEW and they have they're more of a Democrat centered company.
And they, trust me, they are. You know what I mean? You know it when they let they'll let the liberal minded pro wrestlers walk out there with liberal T-shirts on. But if a right wing one did that, you would never hear the end of it.
Yeah,
So
but I mean,
I said before that there is none of that in wrestling, and that's for the most part is true. You know what I mean? Every once in a while, though, I see the slant towards the left in wrestling, especially when they'll CM Punk and Hangman Page, I guess, are two examples of guys who would come out with the left wing politics shirt. And whether I agree with them or not, I'm not a big fan of that. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, Just be your character, bro. I don't care what your politics are. Just be your character.
Well, yeah. Like Miles was pointing out, it'd be like if I was in AEW as a wrestler, and one of the people that maybe was a star there, was a Democrat politician, became like a mayor or something. And I was saying, hey, look, this guy, he has all these Democrat beliefs, and I'd be like, well, you're literally in a Democrat liberal company.
Right.
You're making that company money, and you're going on their politics.
Right. I think that those are fair statements. I think that WWE behind the scenes is slightly right leaning, like you were saying, with Vince and Linda being kind of, Trump fans or whatever. And I do believe that AEW is more of a left leaning company. But both of them are smart enough to not let it become overpowering to the point where, they're going to get it's going to end up like a show like Velma or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not what you're going to get with wrestling. Thank God.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and on one hand, I am glad to see, maybe more. I think in some cases it can be a good thing, because maybe more left-wing wrestling fans, maybe they'd be turned off by WWE, and now maybe they have an alternative in AEW.
Yeah, I would imagine most wrestling fans probably lean to the left. So
yeah, so I think there could be maybe that's a useful alternative.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of AEW. I'm a big fan. AEW could literally do everything wrong and be the most horrible company on the face of the planet, and I'm still going to support them because I do not believe that WWE should have a monopoly on the industry. Like, that's the number one most important thing. MJF actually did an interview recently where he was talking about that, about how AEW is one of the best things to happen in wrestling in a while, not because of what it does or its stories or its characters, but because it basically broke up the monopoly that WWE had on wrestling for 20 years.
Yeah. Well, and it looks like
competition in wrestling is super important. Like competition, healthy competition. Pro wrestling was at its best when pro wrestling is at its best when there is healthy competition, like TV wrestling. So during the Monday Night Wars, and now with this going on.
Yeah, and apparently I've heard that WWE is actually, in the works of being sold.
Yeah, well, they had the rumor, what was that, 2 or 3 weeks ago, about it being sold to Saudi Arabia or whatever, which would have been wild. But I don't think that's not true. But we'll see. We'll see. That'll be interesting to see if it gets sold, because I think the only thing that keeps WWE going is the fact that it's run by the people who built it, right? So that's an unforeseeable future in that sense. Like, what would happen to it if it's now being run by whatever? And the irony of that is that WCW largely failed because it was run by a bunch of different executives, So we'll see what happens with that. The reason why WWE was able to beat WCW was because it was a family-run, company by the people that built it, that understand the industry and stuff like that. So
yeah. Well, if Disney buys WWE, you could start to see the King of the Ring becomes the more Prince of the Ring.
Right.
Yeah, and if they have the Queen of the Ring, like with Zelina Vega, she officially becomes a Disney princess.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of women's wrestling. I'm never gonna say, obviously there's always gonna be a place in wrestling, female wrestling. So I don't ever want to see it go back to the way it was, where their role was to wear skimpy bikinis and that's it. I don't think that's the right path either. So
yeah, it. Well, it shouldn't just be the guys that get to wear trunks.
Yeah, well, yeah, I bring that up to a lot of people too. Is that there's women like to watch wrestling too to see attractive men, right? So why should we be mad at men for wanting to watch wrestling to see attractive women? Vice versa on the opposite side. So
Yeah. So I always think that is a bit of a good sort of thing. And I also know about how going into horror movie culture. What's one of your favorite horror movies?
what you want classic or modern? Which should I do?
Classic.
Classic, probably The Exorcist. I would say it's probably the best horror movie. I'm a big fan of the original Hellraiser. I'm a big fan of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um,
I
I'm a,
like the original. I like the original Halloween.
the original Halloween obviously is a classic. I'm a big fan, and I really like the fact that people over the years have taken to The Thing, to John Carpenter's The Thing as well. You know what I mean? That's kind of become recognized as the great horror movie that it is. When it comes to modern horror movies, it's a little bit more slim pickings. But I'm a big fan of The Witch is a movie I'm a big fan of. And Hereditary. Hereditary is a great movie too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Personally, I always I didn't like how Halloween became more like big budget movie because that was never like the big draw behind Halloween.
Right,
Like,
right, right.
the big thing about Halloween, like I think that made it so endearing to many people, is that it sort of proved that no, you don't have to spend millions of dollars to make a classic movie.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I agree with that too. But the fact remains is that none of them were as successful as the original one. So all of that money that they spent on it was for nothing, really. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
none of them even touched the success of the first one.
yeah,
It's the same thing with Texas Chainsaw too. You know what I mean? Texas Chainsaw is such a low budget movie that really, and a lot of the classic horror movies of that time are all on many of them are on shoestring budgets like that. So
and I think that's what made them so endearing because they were all practical.
well, yeah, practical effects are everything. I'm a big fan of the practical effects. I hate the way the CGI is taking over movies today, and it drives me friggin' nuts. Um,
Some movies are like so CGI that I just wonder why do they make it live action at all?
yeah, and that's a good yeah, it's a great point. That's why
Like,
one of my favorite modern movies is Mad Max: Fury Road because of all the that they built all those vehicles and all the action scenes and all the explosions are all real and pretty much almost everything in that movie is real except for her CGI arm, her prosthetic Furiosa. Um, yeah, but the practical effects, the Jurassic Park is a good example of how to marry practical effects with CGI. But after Jurassic Park, it started to go downhill, where you started to see them use, CGI. They really should only use CGI when it's absolutely necessary, but now they use it just because they can. And the irony of that too is that it costs so much goddamn money.
yeah, and what's funny about it is like it becomes to the point where if you're going to invest this much in CGI, why not just take the live action actors out of it and just make it like just full blown animation?
Right, and there's some arguments that could be made for CGI use, especially when it comes to world building, right? So like being able to go to a different world or like like for let me think. I'm trying to think of an example. Guardians of the Galaxy, I guess, is a good example. Like when it comes to world building, I can see why CGI is kind of useful there, right? That movie probably would not be nearly as good if all of the, you're filming that all in like real life locations because it's so fantastical. Like it's so the worlds that they go to and all these different places, you're really not going to be able to realize that doing that in, a strictly practical live action type way. So like in some cases I kind of understand it. But like I said, you got to know when to use it and when not to use it. And the directors are drunk on it now, and a lot of times. What drives me nuts, like I said, I accept it in a world building type way, and for that, like the prequels are another good example. You know what I mean? So that he can have so many different worlds in the prequels and all that. But what drives me nuts is like Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi, one of the new MCU movies, has like CGI karate in it, and it's like, why? Why are you using CGI in your karate scenes? If I wanted to watch a CGI karate movie, like you said, I would have put on an animated thing or something like that. Like, and that's the silliest thing to use CGI on. Like, use real karate. Like, people praise that movie, and they're talking to, oh, Shang-Chi is so friggin' good, and I'm like, well, no, it's not. The CGI they use CGI in the fights. Look at the if you've seen Daredevil, the on Netflix, there's that one scene in Daredevil where he's fighting a whole bunch of guys in a hallway, and that scene rightfully is praised by a lot of people because it's it's a choreographed karate scene, and I think people want that even in today. It amazes me that these modern directors don't sense that there is a desire among fans of this kind of thing, to see a more down-to-earth practical thing, especially with something like a karate fight in a movie. Like, why are you? I just don't understand why they use CGI in that. Like, it just drives me nuts.
Yeah. So, like a final topic, because I know you want to get off and you want to watch some
Yeah,
more.
and I'm very interested. I feel like we could touch on a lot of different topics if you're interested in perhaps doing another one of these, part 2 or part 3.
Yeah, we could definitely do it. A topic that I always wanted to get into more. This would be the final topic. What do you make of wrestling unions?
Wrestling unions?
Yeah, like what do you think about like how unionizing like wrestling?
Well, I was about to ask you. I was about to say, as far as I know, there is no wrestling union, right? Like that's the issue, right? Is that we're all independent contractors from the bottom to the top, from the smallest indie wrestler to the guys up in the WWE and the AEW, and when you go into WWE and all that, it's even crazier when you think about it. The fact that they're independent contractors, with healthcare and all that. But as far as I know, AEW is taking strides to change that. You know what I mean? I think that has a lot to do with, like we were talking about before, is WWE's monopoly on wrestling. So if they don't want unions, then you aren't going to have them, because WWE is the only option to get on TV. So you're gonna have to do what they want you to do, and they wanted independent contractors. That's the system that they want. But that's why it's very important for us to break up that monopoly, inside the industry, so that we can have different options like that and have maybe a union. But unions aren't always the best thing either. I in other types of business and other types of things, when it comes to teachers or the cops and stuff.
Yeah.
Unions aren't necessarily a good thing, so it's hard for me to say. I don't really know much about all that, and it's not a topic that I really could go too much into depth on. But in wrestling, yeah, some of the stuff I hear about, how wrestlers are independent contractors are kind of sound like horror stories, and it does sound to me like having some kind of bargaining power there in a union on that level would be beneficial to a lot of the
Personally, I personally think it's stupid in many cases to call them, like, it makes more sense to call an indie wrestler an independent contractor than it makes a WWE wrestler.
Oh, absolutely.
Because an indie wrestler, they can go to multiple different feds and they're free to work wherever they want.
Right.
As long as they can make the calls and they can take the trips there, they're their own business. They're their own agents.
Right. Well, you have to
often.
keep this in mind about wrestling. Wrestling is just like Hollywood or like the entertainment industry. So like if if you have a union, or say you go on strike or whatever, there's 1,000 guys out there that are willing to do what you just did, but they'll do it for $5. They don't care, right? Because people just want to get in the door.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, like, yeah. And I think it is with the a good thing with unions though is that they do sort of offer a sort of bargaining power and a chip to many wrestlers. So I think what many people don't like about it is when you call, let's say, a guy like I don't know, let's say Baron Corbin. To call Baron Corbin an independent contractor seems sort of stupid because he can only work in WWE unless some deal is made between Triple H and some other company.
Well, oh, right. Well, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of contradictory nature to all that, especially with WWE and on TV. You know what I mean? But that people have been talking about that for quite a while now. You know what I mean? So you would think that small increments of reform and change are coming, but you never know.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be one thing if, let's say, a guy like Baron Corbin on 1 week be on WWE TV, on another week be like in New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Right.
Like that would be one thing, but when it actually be, yeah, but or if you could have on one day, you could have Baron Corbin as like he's in WWE doing a match with I don't know maybe Kofi Kingston, and then the next week he's doing a match in AEW with Hangman Adam Cole. But you're never going to really see that because which I think is stupid because if they're just independent contractors,
in theory, you'd be able to do that, right?
Yeah, but so if union would be better because it would just it would tear that down and say, look, no, you're officially employees, you can only work with us unless we broker a deal with another company. So it would be better because it would be honest. It would be more honest instead of like what the current model is.
Right. Well, you have to, it's tough with wrestling because it's such a small industry. There's really only, at one point it was basically a monopoly, like I keep saying, and now there's a second company, but it's such a small industry that it's not easy to really to have any bargaining power like that whatsoever. But yeah, I hope that changes in the future because the things I hear about it, they sound terrible. Like when I hear guys talking about it, I have a lot of insight into that because I talk to a lot of guys that have been there or have done it. You know what I mean? It's when I hear things about it, I'm like, yeah, that's not cool, not cool at all. What they do to these guys.
Well, personally, I think if wrestling were to have a union, instead of having its own separate union, what they should do is they should just join up like with the Actors Guild.
It's an interesting idea.
Because I mean, basically, that is what pro wrestlers are.
Absolutely we are.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, they're stuntmen, and stuntmen are covered by the Actors Guild.
We're both the stuntman and the actor, if you ask me.
Yeah, so you're Jackie Chan.
Right. In a lot of ways, yes. Jackie Chan is both the stuntman and the actor. Tom Cruise too, in a lot of ways. I put a lot of things on him.
Yeah, so I mean, I would think instead of having wrestling having its own separate union would be probably smarter. Is just say, all right, well, pro wrestlers are actors and they're stuntmen, so we're just going to have the wrestlers join up with the Actors Guild. I mean, plenty of wrestlers already do Hollywood anyway, so that would probably be an easier transition into Hollywood if they're just all part of the same.
I never really thought of that before, and it's an interesting notion. It's certainly an interesting idea.
Yeah, because I mean, since wrestlers are already going into Hollywood, it would probably be an easier transition for them to get into Hollywood if they're already just part of the same union.
Right. And you're right. And a lot of the Hollywood is the attitudes towards wrestlers as actors, especially in the last 10 years, has really dramatically changed. A lot.
I think guys like
I wasn't always like that. There was always Hulk Hogan making B movies. You know what I mean? But that was about it.
Yeah, I think The Rock is the one that really changed that.
Right. He opened the door for the rest of them.
Yeah. All right.
Honestly,
Well,
I say Batista is honestly the best one out of the bunch, if you ask me.
yeah. Well, John Cena's getting up there.
Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed Peacemaker. You know, I watched that show recently, and I thought it was very good.
It's gonna be so fun. Like if because apparently Batista is leaving the MCU. It'd be so funny if he managed to find a role in DC
Yeah,
because they
I saw rumblings of that online. Them trying to, the fans are kind of like, fantasy booking him in different roles. He says he's too old to play Bane and to do the physical aspects of the Bane character, which I thought was interesting.
well,
Um,
yeah, it would be funny though that it'd be funny if he had Dave Batista, The Rock, and John Cena all in the DC universe.
yeah, well, they're going through a big reshuffle right now, so hey, anything's possible, right?
Yeah, so it'd be funny you have what if you were funny enough you had a movie and both Dwayne The Rock Johnson, John Cena, and Dave Batista were in the same
That
movie.
it might be too much to handle right there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know you want to go see AEW Rampage, and it's 10:20. So, can you tell the audience where they can find you and what your
Yeah.
projects are coming up?
If you're on Twitter, it's _tech_tweets_. Pretty easy to find on there. And if you want to watch me if you want to watch wrestling or me involved in wrestling, or if you want to watch UWA Elite, type in on YouTube, type in King Tech, KINGTEK, UWA Elite. I would type them in combination, because if you type just King Tech, you might get a rap band or something like that. I'm not the only TEK Tech on the face of the planet. So, but yeah, type in, if you're on YouTube, type in both UWA Elite and King Tech, and you will probably find about 500 videos. You'll be watching my wrestling matches for the next 50 years. That's how many of them are on there. So, yeah, if that would be the best way to do it.
All right. Well, it was so nice having you on, bro. We should definitely do something like this in the future when you have
Yeah,
time.
a lot of fun. It was a pleasure, and I really think that this is only the tip of the iceberg. I think we could have some really great conversations in the future. Yeah, we should definitely do this again.
All right. Well, that is all for today. This has been the Brass Exchange with King Tech, and yeah, we're going.